Michael, Matt, good to see you as always. Might as well, not even might as well. Let's just jump right into, Panama Canal and get an update on what's happening there.
Okay. I guess we should start with me in that case, since I'm the one, the canal. All right. Well, I just got off a long talk with Alex Jones. So I canceled the rest of the day because we were going to go on for 15 minutes and it went for more than an hour and a half. So everything's canceled for today. So we have plenty of time to talk. Now the canal is out my window here. And as you can see, the United States is clearly waving the sword here about invasion or some sort of basically taking the canal. And it's very clear that we're lining up to do it. And I'm not sure how much is in the press or whatever. I know that Trump has been very clear about taking the canal and telling the military to make up plans. But I can assure you that we're actually, I say we, the United States, is actually quite serious about taking the canal back. That's clear. I mean, based on very serious people I know and the things that they're telling me, it's very clear that that's exactly what President Trump is thinking about doing. When will he do it? Interestingly, I thought I published a couple of months ago that I thought maybe March 14th, that sort of thing. And the reason I picked that date was because it's a full moon, either a full moon or a new moon, either bright or dark. Generally, they're going to go for something like that if it's some big move, right? And so full moon on March 14th. But then the next day, which would be just 15th, what was today, Monday? There was an explosion and it took out almost all the power across Panama. So that was Saturday night. So it just happened. And my power blinked, actually. I thought, well, here's that moon. And I mean, it's the 15th, not the 14th. And all the electricity just went across the town. And then a lot of the buildings came back on who had backup generators, but it blinked. But a lot of people, their power was out through the night. And now it's flowing again, and so quite interesting, isn't it? So, but there was no invasion. But the Panamanians were like, "Hey, the Americans are invading now," and because they still have their phones working, right? And so everybody's posting they thought Americans were invading, and the normal false reports going along and that sort of thing, and War of the Worlds type stuff. But I don't know why the explosion occurred. I have no idea. But it was substantial, and it took out most of the power in Panama.
But in small countries like Panama, a power outage can be a signal also. Didn't something like that happen in Ecuador?
It did.
A couple months ago?
More like a year and a half ago, maybe. Or maybe it happened again. I don't know. But that was like the Ecuadorian government said that the Chinese need to have visas to come to Ecuador. And keep in mind, Ecuador is a main invasion route of the United States. So they'll land in Ecuador from places like Turkey, and then they'll go up
with no visa, with no entry visa.
Yeah. And so then this is interesting. Actually, that's a side topic, super interesting. But so then the Ecuadorian government said that you have to have visas to the Chinese. And of course, the Chinese are major investors in Ecuadorian electrical infrastructure. And then amazingly, the electricity went out across Ecuador. And then they dropped the visa thing. So probably coincidence, I don't know. But interestingly,
people take these as major signals.
Oh, yeah.
It's not casual when the power goes out in the country.
And the timing was quite coincidental, wasn't it? And right now, for instance, China is very angry with Panama about potentially selling these ports to BlackRock, and China has been very public about that, how angry they are, and including with the people at the Hutchison ports, which is very close to me right now, and they're threatening them, and that could have been obviously a threat from China. I don't know. They can obviously take out the infrastructure here. It's child's play for anybody like China to do this. Especially China has a lot of the software that's running the ports. So this is complicated. I mean, it doesn't mean you shouldn't go for it. I mean, because then China wins by being afraid to take the move. I mean,
But-
the man behind the curtain, Wizard of Oz. I
But
mean, at some point, you gotta go for it.
in this kind of fifth generation warfare, where undersea cables are accidentally cut and ships are accidentally sunk, these kind of things are like a brushback pitch. It's undeclared, pre-kinetic warfare to like give people warnings, and we just see the overt side. If we were looking at the totally classified cables and information at the national level, if a power outage like this happens, say 1 hour after Pete Hegseth just sent a message to the head of the Panamanian National Police, and then an hour later the power goes out, so we're like grasping at straws, or in Plato's cave looking at the shadows, but at a higher level, at the State Department level, we don't know what happened an hour or a day before the power goes out as a signal, like, oh, we just read that cable and we're pissed. Boom, power goes out. And that's a signal that we can do this anytime we want. So there's a lot that we see and a lot we have to extrapolate.
Right. I mean, it was a coincidence, wasn't it? And so at the end of the day, somebody's going to be upset. And I keep saying it over and over and over, that Panama is a defenseless lamb, a juicy lamb, wearing a garland of pork chops, surrounded by predators who are predacious towards each other and this most incredible place, Panama. Even without the canal, this is strategic ground. If there were no canal here and there were no possibility of being a canal here, this would still be strategic ground. This piece of land is so important. Most Americans can't quite grasp it. Everybody who is somebody knows about Panama. I mean, any serious person that's looking at the world from a geopolitical perspective is very well versed in the importance of Panama. And how many military operations were run out of here before the canal was ever built, for centuries, before the United States was ever born. This was a place where military operations were being run in the region, right? And that will not change. And now the Panama Canal is here, and it's this important, right? And then there's the other things, like the path between the seas and the path between the continents, right? Which is being built as we speak. They're building a road that will eventually go to Colombia, right? They're building it right now. And so the Belt and Road Initiative strongly includes Panama, and it includes many other places too, like Argentina, where we just spent 2 months looking at that. Thailand, on and on and on and on. Netherlands, many, many places, right? And so, because when you're building a Belt and Road Initiative, necessarily it stretches around the world, right? Keep in mind, as you well know, you're very well versed in history, this is nothing new. This was going on back in the Roman times. What did the Romans do? Build straight roads, right? They built bridges, roads, they built, ports. The Mediterranean was their world, right? And it was ports and roads and thousands of miles of roads. And interesting that, a lot of people think that this is new, but it's not new at all. Silk Road and all these things, old, it's routes and resources.
This episode is brought to you by Vaulted, launched by McIlvaney Financial Group. The simplest and most affordable way to own physical gold and silver. Physical gold is the only asset outside of the control of the government and banking system. They can print dollars, but they can't print gold. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to vaulted.blbvux.net/coffeeandamike.
Yeah, and I would really strongly suggest that people, because Michael's really he's like on the spot and he's really on a roll with the podcasts. InfoWars, the most recent one, and others in the last couple of days. But the path between the seas has been there for 500 years. I didn't even know this. The first city in mainland North America, not counting, Cuba or Dominican Republic, was in Panama. And we're talking 500 years ago. So way before the canal, it was it was strategic because you could set up essentially a conveyor belt of donkeys moving cargo from a ship in the Caribbean to a ship in the Pacific. So this has been highly strategic for 500 years. And something that really grabbed my attention too, that I was aware of, but you mentioned it today, China is building, or we don't even know who, it's very guarded, but 2 permanent bridges are being built across rivers in the Darian Gap to finally complete a highway, a road. If people don't understand, if you're driving from Mexico to Buenos Aires, you have to take a boat around the Darian Gap. There's never been a road. During the recent mass migration, people have walked through it, but there are river fords that people have to walk across when the river is low enough, and somebody is building permanent highway bridges. And Michael Yan was down there taking pictures of these things like a year ago, and then went to the Panamanian government, which said they had no idea this was happening.
Yeah. In fact, I'm messaging somebody right now about another bridge. I'm going to ask him to they're building another bridge in Darian too. Third one.
While you're doing that, why now is it so important for Panama? I mean, there have been many other administrations, including Trump's first term, Obama, Bush, Clinton. What's the significance of moving on it now? And why is it taking so long?
Previously, I think that can be answered simply if we use Occam's razor, and it probably actually is accurate. Occam's razor in this at this point would be either they're incredibly stupid or they're behaving as enemies. So it's one of those or both of those, because to not pay attention to the Panama Canal is either enemy action or you're just flat out stupid, or both. And so because this is actually, if you read this book, The Path Between the Seas, right here, I mentioned it on Alex Jones, and it's a great book. I mean, it's a really great book to read.
Yeah, that was David McCulloch's first book, and he won a Pulitzer Prize.
And he deserved it.
He wrote biographies of presidents and other historical works, but that was his first major book, and he won a Pulitzer for it. It's unbelievably excellent.
It's unbelievable. It is. And
it goes back to practically the dinosaurs.
Oh man, I gotta read it again. Because we didn't just read the book, we studied it. In fact, when we had Al Johnson and Misako Ganaha down here all together, and I had already read it, and Al was reading it, Misako read it. But each night after we did everything that we did in the day, we would go through this book and study it, because it's so important, right? And we weren't just reading it. I had already read it, but Path Between the Seas. But if you read this book and The Creature from Jekyll, this is a 1977 book, so it doesn't, but everything in it is what you would need to know to understand what's going on right now, right? It's there. It's right here. But if you also read that book and The Creature from Jekyll Island together, and probably doesn't matter which one you read first, you might want to read The Creature from Jekyll Island first. But those two together really paint an interesting picture of Panama. Like, for instance,
the Path Between the Seas covers much more than just the period of the American canal building, but the main part of it is that early 20th century. The Teddy Roosevelt, McKinley, American expansionism, and the bankers and the Federal Reserve, the whole thing. It's all in that first 2 decades of the 20th century.
Those first 2 decades of the 20th century, I think you said this recently, but it's true. Those first 2 decades of the 20th century are absolutely incredible. I mean, this just like a cornucopia of interesting stuff. Federal Reserve Act, 1913, right? That's the same players who got the funding to get, I got to show you this one book I got here. The Federal Reserve Act in 1913, led to the Fed, obviously. And then this place opened in 1914. Of course, they started doing the Haber-Bosch process in Germany, where you could make a lot, cheap explosives, nitrogenous explosives like ammonium nitrate, using natural gas. They started that in 1914, and then of course World War one.
And even
or
even some of the big iron structures of the canal had to be built in Germany at the time, and got to Panama by ship just before the war broke out.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, I found these four
The Krupp Company.
I found these four interesting. I found these four books last week in the library here in Panama. It's a very nice library. It's a library that we left behind for them, actually. And I found four old books that have the passenger list. It's the passenger list for people landing in San Francisco from like 1848-ish to 1853, I think. And I spent several hours looking at those books. Fascinating, man. Those ships carried a lot of cargo back then, I mean, like I got one. Let me read you this one pass. I want to tell you about that book in a minute too. This is just an amazing stuff. I pulled this up because I wanted to read it to you, and because listen to this. It was the fastest transit between Hong Kong and the Northwestern America. So it went to San Francisco. This is April 22nd, 1852. So Captain John Land it's a clipper ship named Challenge. Those clipper ships were high tech. And so the passage took 33 days from Hong Kong, China is what it says. This marks the quickest passage, 33 days. 33 days from Hong Kong, China. This marks the quickest passage between the coast of China and northwestern America yet recorded in the annals of modern voyages. As of April 22nd, 1852, departed from Hong Kong, and it starts talking about the winds and all this stuff. And it's quite interesting, too, because at that time, as you know, clipper ships were very high tech because you didn't have the steamships yet. And the clipper ships, of course, are those big cloud, huge amounts of sail ships. And so they had many competitions. People were watching ships, how fast they could go from France to wherever. And so it was big news. They were constantly competing with these ships. And so that's why, this is a noteworthy entry. I just found it by accident. Oh, but what was on this ship? This is what's interesting. 553 Chinese immigrants. And it says, all unidentified, all in good health, no deaths during passage. And the reason they say all in good health, no deaths during passage is because, this is a time of great disease and pandemic when you should be checking people that are coming into your country.
Yeah,
and
at the same time, people coming from Ireland, half of the ship could die of typhus.
Yeah, I went on that typhus ship. There's a typhus ship actually in Dublin, and the ship allegedly is the one where I think it was an Irish doctor. He started to realize that you got to keep this place clean because the typhus, they call that naval fever. They call it war fever, naval fever, camp fever, hospital fever. And they call it that because it's typhus and it's spread by lice. There's 3 different major types of typhus, and one of them is called epidemic typhus, and it's spread by cooties. Cooties are the old English term for lice. So that's why we play that game when we're children, cooties, right? Get away, he's got cooties. So that doctor on that ship, it's tied up, there in one of the canals there in Dublin. I went on it, and he discovered, hey, I think it's being spread by these cooties, and he started making people keep clean, and so they didn't have cooties, and that stopped typhus. But those Irish coming over, the whole ships were they were using the cheapest ships they could get, and
they were coffin ships.
Yeah, they called them coffin ships. That's right.
Paid, importantly, compared to the slave trade, the Irish paid to get onto the ship. So whether they survived to make it to New York or Boston was irrelevant. They paid before they got on the ship. The African slaves, the slave traders didn't get paid unless they put healthy slaves on the shore in Havana. It's a totally different economic model. If you pay in advance, and they would bring these ships out of semi-derelict ships that had already been condemned, you paid for the passage, got on the ship. They didn't care if you lived in New York. So all of these things like Chinese coming on a ship, the hygiene and cleanliness in the 18th and 19th century, there were people that just had a gut instinct that hygiene really was very important. Like in the Civil War with amputations, using the same saw to amputate person after person, right? There that the whole thing with Walter Reed, and eventually that ties back to Panama with malaria and yellow fever for decades before there's a final announcement made that this is spread by a mosquito. There were people that had the idea that it may have. So there were people that were far in advance of the current science, so to speak, that were already advancing things like hygiene, sterilizing instruments, and other people were saying, oh, that's a bunch of BS. That's that germ theory. Nobody really believes that germ theory.
Not until microscopes, and they didn't really have good microscopes until you start getting into, certainly by the 1870s. Like in 1854, there was that big cholera outbreak in London, and John Snow, he's the father of modern epidemiology. They didn't have good microscopes then, but he had this idea that there was something in the water. And anyway, long story, there's a great book about it called Ghost Map. I've read it. I've studied it. Actually, I took Masako Ganaha to London to the actual pump where if you ask any epidemiologist, or if any are watching, there probably are, they'll know that what you guys say, the epidemiologist, is, remove the pump handle. Remove the pump handle.
Was Typhoid Mary and those things?
That's separate. This was cholera. Typhoid and typhus, by the way, are totally separate.
Always confused.
Yeah. Typhoid can be spread by food, water, and that sort of. Typhus there's different types of typhus. The one that we're most concerned about is called epidemic typhus. Then that is spread by lice, right? And then there's, cholera, going back to cholera, which just killed millions of people. It's believed to have come from the Ganges River, of all places, and spread throughout, Europe and Asia. And if you've been to the Ganges River like I have, you'll understand where anything could come from that river. And that's the most epic river ever. And I'm going to end up writing a book called Mother River, and it's about the Gangama. In Hindi, Gangama means Mother River. Anyway, so in 1854 and 1853, there was a huge cholera outbreak, and John Snow, he made a map, because every serious person always makes or finds a map to begin with, right? If you're going to figure out stuff, I need a map. That's why I have maps in my head, right? I've memorized so many maps. So, I need to know what this looks like on the ground, right? And so he made this map called the Ghost Map. And most of the doctors in 1854, in that time frame, they thought that malaria and all these sorts of things were caused by bad air. And they called it miasma. So you'll see miasma in many, many of these old books that I read. It's miasma this, miasma that. Bad air, swamp gas, swamp air, whatever, sewage. And so that's why they're relating that bad smelling air to diseases. You're onto something. And that's where the name malaria came from. Malaria, right? Yep. Bad air. So that's why people drink gin and tonic a lot. The gin kills the cholera and all that stuff. And the tonic was good for malaria, right? The quinine, right? So anyway, going back to the Ghost Map in 1854, there was a lot of Londoners dying, and most people thought they could just figure it out by thinking about it and not going out. John Snow was more like, I'm going to go see, right? So John Snow started visiting everybody, and he started mapping the cases, and he's like, what's going on here? And at some point he started to suspect the water, and he further suspected the water on Broad Street coming out of a certain pump handle, right? But his data didn't match up with his theory, and he's like, well, wait a minute, it appears to be coming from this one, but how come nobody in the brewery is dying? Nobody in the brewery is even getting sick, and the brewery's right next door, right? But everybody else on the street's getting smoked. You know what I mean? A lot of deaths and a lot of sickness. And a bad thing about cholera is when you get cholera, it's a fecal, it goes, into the water and that sort of stuff. You start to drink the water, but then it makes you start to, squirt out water, vomit, and every other method, right? So you drink more water. So it's a catch-22. You drink more water. I'm dehydrated, more dead, right? So he's mapping up, but alcohol kills it. So they didn't know this yet, though, because the germ theory wasn't born yet, right? So luckily he was an anesthesiologist for the royalty, so he had some wasta, he had some political clout. Otherwise, people would have thrown him into the Thames River or whatever. And but and which was highly polluted. And the more cholera you got, the more cholera you get, because then there's more people that have it, so he finally mapped it all out, and he found one case that was, I've forgotten, like 2 days horse right out of town or something like that. And he rode all the way out there. It's in the book. And he's talking with this guy, and he's like, I heard your mother died. And so he's way out from the pump, and he's asking, like, what did your mother eat, drink, and all this stuff? And he goes, well, I was just in London, and my mother, she loves a problem with the water from the Broad Street pump was that it was really the best tasting water in London. So people would come to get that water. Talk about catch-22. And so he was way out there, and this guy said, I was in London, and my mother, she loves the water from the Broad Street pump, so I got some for her. And then Dr. Snow, he said, he said something like, I didn't have the heart to tell him he probably killed his mother, right, with that water. But anyway, so he goes back, and he tries to sell his story, not to the news, but to his fellow doctors, to like, hey, we gotta close that pump. And everybody's like, you're out of your mind, this germ crap and all this stuff. He's like, actually, maybe it is from crap, but because it comes from feces, right? Or it's in and so finally he persuaded them to remove the pump handle, right? And Dr. Snow removed the pump handle, and it stopped. And they're like, huh. And there was one Italian microscopist. Their microscopes back then were like, you could buy them for $20 with plastic lenses today for children. But he could, they didn't have any depth of field, and they didn't have cameras, and you had to draw. So the best that he saw was something that looked like a comma, and he drew a comma, and that he thought was something in the water. But so anyway, getting back to
it's moving. It was moving.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's an important part. And so we So I took Masako Ganaha over to that pump panel, and I said, listen, and I was like, this is the importance of many things, like always making a map. When we're trying to figure out what's going on, we always map. We have to map things, and always look at maps and look at them, study them. Don't just glance at them, like really like live with that map. And often the map, when you make a map of something, it actually just tells you the story of what's going on, right? And likewise, when you're down in a place like what are the Chinese? Why is Highest here? Why is Catholic Charities there? Why? It's part of a larger architecture. It's not random. It's part of ant trails, right? And it's actually, and the ant trails are in these old books. It's like nothing's new under the sun. Even the routes. Very few of the routes are actually new. They're either stuff that people have wanted to do for a long time, like build the canal across the Panama Isthmus or the Darian Isthmus, or like the Kra Isthmus in Thailand. They've been wanting to build that canal for 400 years maybe, and still they haven't built it because it's pretty difficult. And I think they're going to eventually do it. I first looked at it in 2014, and just looked at it again last year in 2024. And then China's building that canal through the Funan Techo canal from the Mekong River through Cambodia. That will allow China to bypass Vietnam. Anyway, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is routes and resources, sir. Go ahead.
This is something when you were talking to Bannon on War Room on Saturday, and this is the first time I heard these two words like with a hyphen, Mahan McKinder.
Yeah.
Because you're talking to Bannon, he's going to get these things. But
yeah, because when you're talking with Bannon or you or with Mike or with Alex Jones, you can talk at a much higher level.
George McMillan.
Get right to it.
Yeah, George McMillan.
Yeah, George McMillan, yeah.
Yeah.
He sat right at this table I'm at right now, and we did so many briefings with him. That guy, his head's like this big.
Encyclopedia.
Yeah.
So Mahan is choke points. That's 19th century into 20th century. Control these 7 to 15 choke points, and you can dominate world trade. McKinder is the world island. That's if Eurasia ever gets its act together and can trade with internal lines of communication, then America, Britain, Australia, we're all irrelevant, because they'll be able to trade from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok to Beijing, Shanghai, everywhere, New Delhi, internally with pipelines and railroads. And that's what China is doing with people are like rolling their eyes like, who cares about some partially a canal and partially like high-speed rail links to connect, Burma to China or coming through Cambodia to China. This is all about China not having to go through the Straits of Malacca choke point, which is, for Americans, is like called Submarine Alley. It's like,
Yeah.
if you want to get anything from the Persian Gulf to China, you've got to run the American gauntlet of submarines if push came to shove. And China is trying to, and Russia are trying to create their own internal lines of communication for trade. Another one is what's called the International North-South Trade Corridor, which will take a cargo from say St. Petersburg, Russia to New Delhi, India, not using the North Sea and the Mediterranean, but going by rail from Russia across the Caspian to Iran, because the modalities of shifting now from a ship to a putting a container on a ship, then a rail, then a ship, then a rail. These things are like one day. I mean, the Panama Canal does that every day. That's the whole Hutchison-Whampoa on the top and bottom of the Panama Canal, is there are ships that can't fit through the Panama Canal, but they can offload their containers and have them on another ship tomorrow. So this north-south trade corridor is a way for Russia to trade with Iran and then to India and the world in a way that NATO's navies can't interfere with it. We'll have no say in what goes across the Caspian Sea between Russia and Iran, and then on to India and the world. So the world island, that's the Mackinder theory. Who controls Eastern Europe? That's why we're fighting in Ukraine today. Brzezinski made a whole book about it. Who controls Ukraine controls, Eastern Europe will control that, part of the world island will control the world. And the great game in the 19th century was Britain always trying to be the counterbalance to whoever would risk putting, say, Germany and Russia together as a bloc. That's why the first Crimean War was the British versus the Russians in Crimea, going on 200 years ago. And finally, Eurasia, we're looking at possibly an internal trading bloc where Europe becomes just Disney World for tourists visiting old castles. They have no energy. Their own population is being replaced. So, Germany, Britain, France, they're becoming irrelevant. And this is why the big shift, why Panama, why Greenland. I think that Trump is seeing this. And one of Marco Rubio in his speeches and in a talk he had with Megyn Kelly, of all people, he was talking about why Panama, why Greenland. It's because this era that we thought we considered the unipolar world, where the rules-based order, America will be the global hegemon, and we're going to just control everybody everywhere. We don't have to particularly worry about Panama because, of course, all of these places are within our hegemonic role. But Trump is seeing beyond that. There are going to be power centers. There's going to be China and Asia. There's going to be Russia, and there's going to be America. So the key terrain to totally, actually, physically control now, Greenland is very important. That's the North Atlantic, the polar routes. Whatever minerals they have under the ice is almost, a bonus, but just in terms of the terrain. And Panama is like if you look at the infinity symbol and tilt it, that's what Panama is. It's where north meets south and east meets west. It's like the navel of the world in terms of trade. It's such key terrain that if Trump needs to find a casus belli, like when we went in for Operation Just Cause in the 90s, It was Noriega was bullying some
89.
American officers, and the next thing you know, there's paratroopers going in. And this is something I just wrote today because it's I know, but this is Panama. This is the Canal Zone. Okay, that little red part, which is like 2% of Panama, that was American territory. We didn't say we owned Panama. We said, we're going to build you a canal, but we're going to take charge of this part, just this part. That's called the Canal Zone. And we know people born there like Matt Tomlin. But if we're at risk of losing control of that, I think that we could see American troops in there. And you showed a very interesting video today. It looks like Panama, after Noriega, got rid of its military officially. They have national police and they have like border police, the Senafront. And they look like they're gearing up almost like in El Salvador Bukele mode, like really gung-ho for nationalism. And the trade unions and other leftists seem to be gearing up this week for a general strike. And the general strike could close the canal because if they're blocking all the roads and employees can't get to the canal, that could be considered you're breaking the treaty, you're blocking the canal. And that could be enough to have, the 82nd Airborne and the 101st landing in there.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Oh, sorry, Matt.
I mean, and this could be, we're talking like, March 2025 this is happening, not something hypothetically.
So let me ask you guys both this. I think you just kind of answered it, but what is it if the United States is serious about taking over Panama? What would that look like? Boots on the ground?
No, not Panama. Not Panama. Important distinction. This. Not Panama. Not Panama. We're not talking about taking over Panama. This, the Canal Zone, that was our territory. We created the country of Panama. We peeled it off from Greater Colombia. We created Panama, and the deal was, we'll make this canal, you'll all be rich. Your country will be lifted from like 5th tier to 2nd tier, but we're going to own this forever. That was the deal. Carter gave that away, but there was still a treaty that gives us preferential passage, etc. If the canal is blocked, we may say you're an abrogation of the treaty, and we're going to come back in and take our rights over this, the Canal Zone, not
Blocked
Panama.
or endangered.
Not Panama. That.
It's definitely endangered. Blocked or endangered. And it's definitely endangered. There's no question about it. There's no question about it. They're in violation of the treaty. There's no question about that.
Is that what you're seeing down there, Michael? Where in terms of so the workers would unite to do some kind of work stoppage to block anything coming in and out? Is that what I'm understanding, Matt or Michael?
Actually, I think there's going to be violence this week in Panama, but I think it's going to be related to probably on Friday, I'm guessing, maybe tomorrow actually as well, Tuesday. But and that a lot of that deals with internal matters on their Social Security and this copper mine and some other things. But you'll probably see some American flags burned as well, and maybe even if somebody decides to kill some Americans as casus belli, that would probably work. So, I mean, if somebody were planning to actually make casus belli to invade Panama, killing some Americans this week would probably do it. It certainly would do it. And now, on 68 labor unions met yesterday. They decided that they would do a protest on Tuesday, and they would then block the whole country on Friday, this Friday coming up, right? And so if they do that, they've also talked about everything blocked, like medical services, everything, like including the ports. They said they're not going to block the canal. That's as I understand it at this point. If they were to block the canal, it's on, game on, straight up. And but if they block the ports, the roads of the roads to the ports, that's interfering with the canal right there. That's straight up interfering with the canal. And so that's another violation of the treaty. That's why we had the Panama Canal Zone, so you couldn't do stuff like that, right? And so that we had this buffer zone around it. And that was where the Zonians lived. That's why they called them the Zonians. They lived in the Panama Canal zone, which is almost like a separate little country of America, right? 10 miles on each side of the Panama Canal, right? And so and that's what America may take back. I don't know. It'd be difficult now because many Panamanians now live in the zone. So I'm not sure how you would handle that. And also Panama built up a large part of the canal. They built upon it and added, so it's not the same canal that it used to be. There's much Neo-Panamax Canal. It's a much larger canal, which is, they commingle in Gatun Lake, but the locks on either side are separate because one is for much bigger ships, right? And the 1914 canal still works beautifully, actually. So again, they're like the same canal, but they have different endings on each side, between the Atlantic side and the Pacific side. But if they kill Americans or if they credibly cause any disruption on the Panama Canal, casus belli, right? I mean, because that's clear. I mean, they start killing Americans. That's why we invaded in 1989, was dead Americans, right? And America will demand an invasion if they kill Americans this week.
But at a macro global level, I see this with what Trump is saying, with what Marco Rubio said. Clearly, Trump wants to end the Ukraine war, and he's essentially telling Putin, whether he's saying it, in secret cables or just hinting at it, you do Eastern Europe, okay? We're going to do the Americas. China's out. I mean, I just saw today there's an Argentine pilot flying home, crossing the equivalent of in American states, just Chinese fishing ships lit up to bring the fish up, covering tens of thousands of square miles.
As many of us warned years ago they would do this, and here they go.
They're strip mining both sides of South America. So I see Trump moving to consolidate. That's why he's talking about Greenland. It's the same as Panama. In the sense of we're going to totally dominate. That's why he talks about Canada as the 51st state. He's making a message to the world. America is North America, as much of South America as we can control, because already China is the biggest business partner of Brazil and all these South American countries. It's eclipsed America in trade over the last 20 years. It's eclipsed it. America used to be 75% of Brazil's trade. Now it's flipped to China. So essentially, the way I see it, Trump is saying, okay, Fukuyama, end of history, unipolar world, that's all over. But we're going to attempt to dominate our corner of the world. You dominate your corner of the world, Russia, China, but we're going to make major power moves in places like Panama, major power moves. And if Russia ends up taking Kiev or the Dnieper River or Odessa, we really don't care where the border is in Ukraine. It didn't matter to us before. The Ukraine means the borderland. It was never a country, a real country before the breakup of the USSR. It's just been used by the neocons as a casus belli for the West versus Russia to try to break up Russia. Trump is saying that's over. Russia is going to be Russia. He said these words. At the end of all this, there's still going to be a Russia. See, Victoria Nuland and the neocons, their whole goal was, at the end of this, there won't be a Russia. There'll be, a broken up, fractured place that used to be Russia that we're going to chop up and sell and trade in. But Trump is saying that's done. There, at the end, there's going to be a Russia. That's going to dominate Eurasia. How they work it out with China, they have fought before, China and Russia. They may in the future, but it's not our problem. But Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Panama, and into South America, that's going to be our backyard, and we're going to use major power to assert ourselves there.
Matt, do you think that
that's why it's not like a whim that we're all talking about Panama.
Do you think that ties into the conversation I had with Matt Smith? How they were going to divvy it up, and like United States will take their portion, and then Russia would take their portion, and then China, or like that ties into like the
Well,
global and the.
a lot of it is just recognizing reality. In the Second World War, the United States produced hundreds of military aircraft per week, hundreds, and dozens of ships per week. And we were, Russia could not have won if they weren't putting their troops in American trucks that we were sending to them on the Murmansk convoy. I mean, there were millions of brave Russian soldiers, but they were riding in American trucks. And now that has completely flipped. Now China is outproducing America in ships more than 100 to 1. We basically don't even produce ships anymore. We're kind of like Great Britain in the 1950s, where we still have the fumes of the old empire in our brain. In the late 50s, there was this thing called the Suez Crisis, where France and Britain were going to take over the Suez Canal and basically put Egypt back in a colonial status. And Eisenhower said, no, that's done. And we're not joining you, and we're not supporting you in any way. So back off of that. Your empires are done. This is when France still controlled Vietnam, North Africa. Britain still, the sun never sets on the British Empire. But they were running on fumes. They were writing checks with their mouth that they couldn't cash. The British Empire was a hollow shell. In a sense, that's how the USA is now. We're still talking like it's Reagan 1990, 80s and 90, like we have a almost 600 ship Navy. We don't have anything like that. But meanwhile, China is turning out submarines like you can't believe. I mean, they're turning out submarines like they were America in World War II. So, and the same thing with Russia, building tanks, artillery, all of these things. We just don't have the industrial capacity. So we're talking, smack like we're still a global superpower in industrial output, and we're not. It's even a bigger joke for Germany and Britain and France to talk about sending troops to Ukraine. It's like
they're shooting tear gas on the street near my hotel right now. That's what I was looking at, some incoming traffic.
Well, let me ask you guys something in regards to the Panama Canal. If this strike does occur, so who's shooting tear gas right now, Michael? The workers?
Somebody just sent me a video. It looks like police shooting the tear gas. I'll send you the video.
So who would? But if this strike is being organized, who's organizing this in terms of who are the puppeteers that are sending out these workers to potentially lead a strike? Is there a country behind this? Is it a George Soros-like figure to be a disruptor?
Well, they have their own internal issues with pensions and Social Security and government salaries.
So it ties into that then.
But a big issue is after Noriega, Panama got rid of its quote unquote its military officially, but their national police are like their military, and they seem to be very stridently pro-control and anti-chaos. Like they're just not going to tolerate the country being brought to its knees by strikers blocking roads. They seem to be prepared, armored up, ready with the tear gas, the gas masks. They're at a riot control level. They seem to be almost at a military level. Like so a big question is, if there's some kind of a stoppage of the canal, and remember, we're really talking this zone right here, the canal zone. Will their national police, aka military, will they side with the strikers against American intervention, or will they side with American intervention in the canal zone against the strikers? So it's sort of like at the end, roughly parallel to the end of the Soviet Union. Will the military back the communists or go with Yeltsin, who led Gorbachev, Yeltsin, Putin? Which way will the military go? So that's the big $64,000 question now in Panama is their national police / military, which way are they going to go? Are they going to go with the rioters against an American intervention, or will they go with an American intervention and keep the rioters away from the canal?
What are you hearing, Michael? Anything?
It looks like it's just a little riot going on. I don't know. Did they have? Let me see how this develops. I'm sending it over to a couple people to get more information right now. You guys keep talking. I'm gonna see what's going on down there.
Well, while you're doing that, side note, I saw breaking news. I don't know if it's breaking news, but they're going to release the JFK files tomorrow. Did you see that, Matt?
Which ones? the ones cleared by Mossad, or the?
I mean, at this point, are you going to trust whatever they put out there tomorrow?
I like to see more, but at this point, I don't really like the Epstein stuff. If that was all a Mossad operation, do you think a Mossad's going to burn itself?
I mean, those files are 6 years old at this point, and Trump had access to that his first term, and it was never put out. Epstein, I'm talking about.
But he didn't control the FBI then. No. The FBI was a hostile organization to him. So if the FBI was sitting on the files that were taken out of Epstein's brownstone, they had the Hunter Biden laptop, and they lied about it and hid it. That was while Trump was president. An honest, loyal FBI could have blown the whole Russiagate thing out of the water, and blown then Vice President, former Vice President Biden out of the water. They knew all about the corruption. They hid it from Trump while Trump was president. But there's a new sheriff in town, and Dan Bongino is about to walk in the door, and he's a cancer survivor, and he's a very devout, and I wouldn't call him necessarily fanatical, but he's like a very hardcore guy, and I don't think he thinks he's like in terms of like I want to live to 90 as my main goal as a cancer survivor. He's there. He's gonna whatever spine needs to be put in Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, I think Dan Bongino is going to put it there. So, but all of these people at some level are Zionists. As much as I like Bongino and Pam Bondi, they're not going to do anything that puts Israel in a bad light. They just won't do it. If the JFK files all point to communists and the mafia, they'll release it. But if anything points towards the Mossad, they'll hide it, I think.
Well, and that's they've talked about Kennedy's ties to Mossad, right? I mean, who do you think is behind his death and his brother?
Well, there's so many layers to the onion, but there's an AIPAC angle. There's a military-industrial complex angle where supposedly JFK was hinting that he did not want a huge involvement in Vietnam. He was all about the Green Berets and unconventional warfare. But I don't think he was thinking about, main U.S. Army divisions being deployed in Vietnam. So there's the military-industrial complex angle, like in Ukraine today. Billions of dollars are made if we're going to be building thousands of jets and sending divisions over. That's a huge churn of money, right? Green Berets have a very light footprint, and you don't spend much money on Green Berets in an unconventional warfare environment. But if you're going to be sending the U.S. Marine Corps and the Air Force and building bases, building all those bases, billions of dollars, building bombers and fighters, billions of dollars, helicopters. So if JFK was talking about, I don't want to do that, there's a tilt against him there. The AIPAC Mossad thing is another angle. But who knows what's the predominant angle for deciding to get rid of JFK? But I think that at some level, and I don't know if Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy or part of it, but I hope we get to see a full file. But how will we ever know if it's a full file? they've had so much time to massage it and sculpt it, redact it so it's not just like blacked out pages, but the blacked out pages won't even be there. So
I wonder if they'll do their white binders like they did a couple of weeks ago with those right.
Yeah, that was Pam Bondi is in a lot of ways she's very amateurish, and I mean I think that, like Matt Gaetz, she comes from big money. I mean, like real big money. So I don't know how hard she's had to work. There's like, there's an old saying, if you're blonde and growing up, I'm talking about, if you're blonde and beautiful, you think that food just shows up on your plate, right? You know what I mean? It's like, of course I went to this law school. Of course I went to that law firm. If you're blonde and beautiful, the food just shows up on your plate. And I don't know how much backbone she's got if it comes, if push comes to shove. I have a lot more faith in somebody like Dan Bongino when he's in there.
Yeah, when I saw that, I thought to myself, there's no way she didn't know what the outcome was going to be when there was nothing there. I just don't believe that. And people were eating it up. They were eating it up.
But how much did she even understand or know? I mean,
she had to know. I think I watched the movie Gladiator the other day. Not to compare to movies, but I thought the reference made me think of that. Remember when you saw that movie, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So
memorized.
Remember when Joaquin Phoenix, he returns to Rome and he didn't want to hear about the Senate. He didn't want to hear about any. He wanted to completely dissolve the Senate. And later on, you see the senators are sitting, eating, and they see that they're going to bring the games back, right? 30 days of games, of gladiator games. And the one guy goes, "Oh, I think he's smarter than I think we got to give him more clever than what we thought." They don't know, people don't understand what Rome is. It's the mob. Give them death, and they will love him for it. Now, this isn't death, but what does this country, people love? They love drama. They love drama. That was all drama. That whole thing.
But I don't think that Pam Bondi is still in a sense like a don't want to use the term media whore, but I mean, you go on Fox News every day to like talk about stuff that is not even the top tier of interest. So in some sense, I think she's just a media creation. She was in the right place at the right time in Florida. You can talk about going against fentanyl and going against gangs and all of this, but she was also part of that whole Trayvon Martin. That was like a George Floyd of a decade ago. So I don't really have a lot of faith in her. Obviously, it's better than Christopher Wray or Merrick Garland in charge, but I don't see a lot of backbone in her. So the people that are around her, I think, can dominate her pretty easily in terms of convincing her which media strategy is most important. I don't see her as having like a strong internal North Star. I think she's mostly a media creation and somebody that loves just the media spotlight, and as opposed to Kash Patel, who was the main anti-Russiagate guy when Devin Nunes was the only one coming out on Maria Bartiromo on Sundays saying that the Steele dossier is all crap. That was Kash Patel giving him that information. And he's now the head of the FBI. And with Dan Bongino, it's sort of like a commanding officer, executive officer, or president, vice president. We've seen with Vance can be like the heavy. Vance can be the one that slaps Zelensky around so that Trump can appear above it. Dan Bongino is going to be the heavy inside the FBI. Kash Patel can make the public announcements, but Dan Bongino is going to be inside monkey wrenching the FBI for the good guys. So I do have a lot of hope there. I don't know when he's actually coming on board. His last podcast was last week, but it's definitely interesting times. But I have no faith in anything about Epstein, JFK, RFK. MLK, because I think it's all been sanitized by now. And you just have to question who's doing the sanitizing. But most of the people that Trump chose, in the end, they are Zionists. Colonel Daniel Davis was going to be, he was being floated as Tulsi Gabbard's assistant, national security advisor, and he got nuked by like Mark Levin and Laura Loomer, because they say, oh, you know, you're accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza, so you're out. Boom, you're done. You can still see who has a lot of the control in this country, and it's, you know,
well, and
little teeny country over there.
And hence, you know, over the weekend with Yemen, right?
Well, clearly they still want to see a war with Iran. You know, there are forces trying to get us to drag us into a war with Russia in Ukraine. Macron and Keir Starmer are talking about using any kind of a fig leaf of a ceasefire, even if it's like a unilateral ceasefire that we declare. We're going to drop British and French troops in, clearly with an idea that there'll be a tripwire that if Putin, as he said he would, just treat them as another foreign mercenary force and attack them, trying to escalate this to World War III. And at the same time, Israel clearly trying to leverage us into a war with Iran, you know, that would suit Israel but not us. I mean, you can look at the Israeli soldiers with the greater Israel patch. The greater Israel patch goes to the, you know, from Egypt to the Euphrates River. And this is not like just a crackhead pipe dream. You know, they're believing it. That what's going on in Syria.
That's why our war about Iraq was about. Our war about Iraq with Iraq was actually about this. But that's you know, it wasn't about WMD. That much is clear at this point. Actually, I'm still trying to figure out what's going on out here because it's really close to me. That's why I'm a little bit distracted.
If you ever had a chance to, like, Alex Jones, he has a camera up in the ceiling so that he can, like, he'll say, put the camera on this, because he's like reading a page and the camera's aimed at the page right in front of him. If you ever saw Michael Yon's desk, it's like a rat's nest of white and black wires and laptops, and iPads and smartphones, and he's got the war room right in front of him.
It's command center.
Power packs.
Yeah, it is.
What
Power packs.
What
Discharged it.
what about your thoughts on what's happening in Syria right now? Whoever,
It's being
this
carved
general.
up.
You should take that, Matthew.
Yeah, well, yeah, we said 10 years ago, Jake Sullivan, AQ is our guy. You know, AQ is on our side in Syria. That was like actual State Department message. AQ is on our side in Syria. We've been supporting all of these. They changed the mask by changing the names, but Al Qaeda, ISIS, Al Nusra, Free Syrian Army, these are all just different names for the same ways that we're funneling funds and weapons to these guys, because it's as you can say, under the theory of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Our main enemy is Russia. Assad was a Russian ally. So anything that we can support that will get rid of Assad and you know, kick Russia in the nuts, we would do, including supporting ISIS. So the guy Jelani just went to Brussels today. He used to wear, you know, an ISIS black turban. Now he wears a suit and tie, but he's cleaned up enough to go to Brussels to get more money. Meanwhile, they're ethnically genociding the Christians and the Alawites in Syria. And Israel, early in this incursion, Israel moved to this mountain called Mount Harmon, which is like the highest ground, like just outside the Golan Heights, but it's artillery range from Damascus. So the city of Damascus, which is like one of the three great Arab cities, would be like, Jerusalem, Cairo, Damascus. These are like really key for Arabs. It's now in artillery range of Israel, and they're never going to give that up. So Israel's moving from the southwest towards Damascus. Turkey's controlling the north. We're still controlling the east. We still have American troops in the east. Essentially, we're carving up the carcass of Syria, and the Christians and Alawites are being massacred on our watch in those areas. But yeah, they don't want to see and you had Kevork on last week. He's really the subject matter expert. It's a great show that you had with him. But nobody wants a unified Syria. And what is a unified Syria anyway? All of these countries that were created by the British and the French at the end of World War I, they're not really organic countries. They're really collections of sectarian groups, that for a time period in Iraq or in Syria, you can put one dictator in charge that can control it all. But in the end, it's going to, there's too many fracture lines that can be exploited to break it up. But yeah, it's a shame though that the Christians and Alawites are being totally genocided. It's like Pol Pot killing fields right now, and the leader of that killing field is in Brussels wearing a suit and tie, getting money from Europe.
He changed his name too. Did you see? He doesn't go by Jelani anymore.
But he's still going to be Jelani. I mean, he can change his name from Mr. Badass to Mr. White Hat, but he's the same guy, right?
Well, how about and what
he was al-Baghdadi's deputy. He's the deputy commander of ISIS.
And what Kevork said too, which I thought was really interesting, was how Qatar is punishing the Alawites.
Right. They still want to get a pipeline across there. They still want to get a pipeline there, and there's multiple routes. But something that people need to know is that liquefied natural gas, depending on it depends on the distance. It has to go by ship. But like, say from Texas to going from Texas to Europe, LNG is 3 to 4 times more expensive than pipeline gas, where you just put it in a pipe and pump it under the Nord Stream pipeline or across Ukraine or Poland. LNG gas, you have to compress it, put on a ship, then decompress it, regasify it. It's 4 times as expensive. So imagine if you could get gasoline at one gas station for $2 a gallon, or across the street it's $8 a gallon. Where are you going to go, right? So if somebody blows up the gas station that's selling gas for $2 a gallon, and you've only got the $8 a gallon gasoline, you've got to use it. Well, that's what Europe is now without Nord Stream. Europe is buying the $8 a gallon gasoline, so to speak. So Europe talking about rearming, rebuilding its defense infrastructure, it's a joke because they can't afford the energy. Already, energy prices for Europeans, just pay their electric bill, their heating bill, has doubled in the last year. They're strapped, they're broke. So Qatar, if they can drive a gas pipeline from the Persian Gulf to Europe, then they become the cheap gas station. Because if Qatar can only sell, petroleum is easy to send by ship, just black petroleum, liquid petroleum. There's not much loss there. Put it on a ship, send it anywhere. But LNG that you have to compress and then regasify at the other end, very expensive. So the Persian Gulf countries would love a natural gas pipeline, like with the Russians with Nord Stream, but at some point it would have to cut across Syria. It can go into Turkey and then into Europe, but at some point it had to cut across Syria. When Assad was a Russian ally in control of Syria, Russia was selling natural gas to Europe, its own natural gas, so there was never going to be a pipeline across Syria while Assad was in charge. Now there's really no Syria. Jolani does not control the Turkish part, the Israeli part, or the American part. He controls, a middle part and the coast to a certain extent. But now it's feasible for the Qataris to be talking about a pipeline. And the thing about pipelines, when you don't have to go across the Himalayas or like under the, Marianas Trench. If you're just talking about a pipeline across a desert, you can lay that thing down so fast. I mean, it practically builds itself. The pipes and the infrastructure to build pipeline is so well understood. You can have a pipeline running to Europe in no time at all. And you're talking huge money. We're talking about, the global bankers. If you can switch Europe from, we took Europe from the $8 a gallon gasoline or $2 a gallon gasoline, blew up Nord Stream, put them on American $8 a gallon gasoline. I'm just, making an analogy, right? And here comes Qatar, and they're going to send $3 a gallon gasoline, natural gas, through a pipeline. The amount of money that they're going to make is incalculable. And you can build these pipelines across the desert super fast. But they had to get Assad out of the way. So between the Turks and the CIA, they got rid of Assad. And Christians and Alawites being genocided, who cares?
So now,
it's just not. It doesn't matter to these people.
So the United States and Israel right now, it seems like they're remaining very silent on this and just let them sort it out. Because I also saw Jolani and Hezbollah were battling in Lebanon.
Well, Jolani is a Sunni, and the Assad regime was an alliance between the Alawites, who would consider themselves like a Shia offshoot. Okay, strict Shia would consider the Alawites to be like Mormons, the way that Christians, if Baptists look at Mormons and they don't see Christians, okay? Mormons see themselves as Christians, but Baptists don't, or Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a certain point where it's like you're outside the tent. So the Alawites trace themselves to the Shia branch of Islam, not the Sunni branch. So even though the Sunnis overall in Syria were a small majority, the coalition of Alawites, mostly on the coast, Christians, and Shia was enough to dominate Syria for all these, for these decades of the Assad and his father's regime. So the Sunnis have a huge chip on their shoulder. They had some pretty, they had a rebellion, I think like in the 70s or early 80s in the town of is it Homs? But where the Syrian army, Assad's Syrian army, put down a rebellion by basically doing just artillery on a city. Just like, you're going to take over this city and have a Sunni rebellion. We're going to threaten our rule in Damascus. We're going to just level your city with artillery. So the Sunnis have a major chip on their shoulder. It's not their anger against Christians and Alawites not coming out of nowhere, okay? They have a major chip. So for the first time in many decades, the Sunnis are in a position to get revenge against their former overlords, which were Alawites, Iranian Shia, which was the Hezbollah connection, and Christians. So that coalition is now broken, and the Sunnis are getting the revenge. And from the Israeli point of view, while Assad was in power, Hezbollah had a transportation pipeline both on the land and in an air corridor all the way from Iran across Syria and into Lebanon. Well, with Assad gone, that pipeline is broken. So from Israel's point of view, looking at Israel seeing Lebanon being, Hezbollah in Lebanon being entirely logistically supported by Iran, Sunnis taking over Syria, that pipeline is broken. That logistical path is broken. So it's a huge victory for Israel, and they're actually moving towards Damascus. They have artillery range of Damascus today. And so just from Israel's point of view, who cares if Christians and Alawites are being massacred in Syria? For us, it's like a big march towards greater Israel. Turkey sees a chance to get over on the Kurds, increase their sphere of influence deeper into former Syria. The Russians still have bases on the Mediterranean, but it's questionable whether they'll be able to retain them. Christians and Alawites have fled to the Russian Air Force Base on the northwest coast of Syria, on their little Mediterranean coast. So, I mean, it's a huge mess, and I think that at this point, Trump tried to get our soldiers out of there, and in his first term, and our own military basically lied to him and said, no, we're not taking those soldiers out. That was like the extent of Trump's power. He said, we still have troops in Syria, let's get them out. And it was like, no, we can't do that. So we'll see what happens now. But personally, I think Trump is thinking North America, Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Mexico will deal with the cartels, control Panama. Let the Middle East play out. You know, if Qatar can get a pipeline to Europe, fine, but it's not our battle. Although he just did major bombing raids on the Houthis in Yemen, blew up one of their ports again. Don't know if that's going to stop anything.
I was going to say, how much of an impact is that going to have? Because they were doing that prior in the last administration.
Yeah, and if you're dealing with people that aren't that their entire psychological motivation is jihad, that they'll fight you, and even if you kill all their wives and children and brother, they're still going to fight you. It's not like they're going to get to a point where they say, okay, we cry uncle. Their motivation is religious and philosophical. As long as Iran can keep feeding them with drones and missiles, and Yemen itself. Now the Houthis don't control all of Yemen, but the part of Yemen that the Houthis control, we're talking like Florida and Georgia. This is not a small area. It's not Rhode Island or Connecticut. We're talking like Missouri level size big areas. And if Yemen can be resupplied from Iran, what are we going to do? Attack Iran to stop them from infiltrating weapons into Yemen? The Israelis would like to see us do that. But I think that Trump will do a couple punitive missions like this, but really the Red Sea is not our problem anyway, because if you look at like the top 10 nations that have, the last year or two aside, the top, say, 10 nations that ship through the Red Sea, America's not even in that list. This is really Europe trying to get to Asia as a shortcut around Africa. America's not, we don't need to go through the Red Sea. We don't send much from, say, New York to the Mediterranean to India through the Red Sea, very little. So if Europe wants to keep the Red Sea open, let them do it. Let them pay for it. Where's their Navy? So I hope that Trump is thinking in terms of like gradually pulling out of there, because a closed Red Sea, yeah, it hurts Europe, and it hurts India, and if anything, it helps Russia in the sense that that north-south international north-south trade corridor across the Caspian becomes more important, because we're never going to put NATO ships in the Caspian Sea. That ain't happening. That's between Iran and Russia. So if you look at this like the board game of Risk or some other global mapping strategy game, I see this as a big realignment where we had been completely tight with Europe, America, NATO versus Soviet Union. This is all stopping now. and America is going to consolidate in our own corner of the world. Europe is failing as we speak because they can't afford the energy to do anything. They can't afford it. Windmills aren't going to build tanks. And LNG from Texas at 4 times the cost of pipeline gas isn't going to get them against Russia. Remember, if Russia has surplus gas to sell to Europe, super cheap, and then we blew it up and cut it off, Russia still has that super cheap gas. That means their factories run super cheap. And there used to be a YouTube guy that he just showed like his house in somewhere in Russia, like in the winter, and he has on like his stove and every gas appliance just running giant blue flames, okay, like 24 hours a day, and he's going, oh, that cost me $1 today. And that would be like 100 times cheaper than, say, some guy in Holland or Germany who's freezing. How is Europe going to rebuild their armaments production when they can't afford to stay warm?
Germany's, Audi, I think, just announced that they're going to cut another 7,000 or so. All these guys, all of Europe is being deindustrialized, right?
They can't afford the energy, and energy is the blood.
Remember, I was warning about BASF and Groningen long before they were cut. It was very clear that this was going to happen. And so much so that Masako and I went to Germany twice, warning about Nord Stream before it was cut, long before it was cut. The last time we were there was 14 days before it was cut. And here I am in Panama warning that we could invade. You know what I'm saying? I really think it might happen here. Let's see.
Yeah, I thought that video that you were sending around about the national police commanders doing their reviews, those troops look like they are ready. They're at least in the video, they're looking like Bukele's soldiers ready to like storm the ghettos.
Notice they've got C-50 Avon masks. I've got a couple of those. I use those over in
and they're not cheap.
No, they used to be about $1,000 each, but now I checked Avon yesterday. They're about $535 for the base mask. But by the time you get all the stuff that you need, it's going to be at least $1,000 because you need filters and I like a voice emitter is pretty helpful. That sort of thing.
It's interesting for Senafront and their national police. Their logos are Dios y Patria. They're very hardcore guys.
God and country. Yeah. Oh, Senafront's very serious. These are really very professional people. Actually, they're not like a third world band of idiots. These are serious people.
Right.
Actually, I like having Senafront around. I don't fear them at all because they are quite professional. And as you know, when we're around Senafront, when we were in Puerto Baldia and all that, I was never worried about Senafront because we knew, they weren't going to come and just like shoot us or something like that or beat us up or harass us. They're too professional for that.
Extremely professional. And with good equipment and total terrain knowledge, the question is, if it's a prolonged national strike, general strike that closes the canal, are they going to hold the hordes back from the canal zone while the 82nd drops in, or are they going to attack the 82nd at the drop zone?
I think my guess is they'll be on our side. That's my guess, and I have reasons for guessing that. Various, but I think that they won't. I don't think that they're going to be against Panamanians general, because I just don't think. I'm just not seeing that.
See, but
against gangsters, yeah.
If the declared goal is we just want to keep this open, right? Just this.
Yeah.
And we're going to respect everybody's property rights. We understand it's now private property. If you have a business, you have a house, we're not taking that away from you. But within these boundaries, we're going to make sure that things are still running.
Yeah.
If we only knew somebody that was ever a parachutist that had dropped into Panama.
Let's call him up. He's at home now. Let me message to him.
I got to get him back on. You talk about Chuck?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had him on in a while. So did you find anything out, Michael? What's going on in the streets?
I think it's just a normal riot, probably. I mean, Panamanian students are like American or like German and American and British students. They just get out and do student stuff sometimes.
But something that Americans should think about when you think about this country, it's not that little. So think about like Florida or something like that, except with 10,000-foot mountains. It's quicker to fly from Miami to Panama or Houston to Panama than it is from, say, San Diego to, Houston. I mean, you get on the airplane and you're in Panama City like 7:37, couple hours, you're there.
That's what I keep telling people. This place is so vital terrain. It's unbelievable. Like, military operations have been launched from this area, like Panama, Darian, since the 1500s, right? And that was before we had fighter aircraft and supersonic missiles and hypersonic missiles. So, I mean, whoever owns this in the Central America, you can project amazing amounts of power. And clearly China is trying to take it. And look, I mean, the bottom line is, like Hawaii and so many other places, somebody was going to take Hawaii, right? It was either the Russians or the British or the Japanese or the Chinese. Somebody was going to take Hawaii. We took it, right? And if we didn't take it, it would be in the hands of Chinese or Japanese or somebody else, right? It would have been. Certainly, it would have been. And the king of Hawaii. Remember, he had that flag with all these different countries represented on the flag, so that he was trying to appease everybody. He's lucky that we took Hawaii. Very lucky. And a lot of the Hawaiians recognize that. Actually, a lot of the Hawaiians actually recognize that they actually genocided people to take Hawaii, but we didn't genocide them to take Hawaii. Right? They definitely did it. Even Bruta is, somewhere. I love. He's a great singer, but he's gone now. But in one of his songs, he's singing about how Hawaii was, taken. Basically, bad white people have come and take Hawaii. But then part of his song, he's like, how our king had conquered every island one by one. Yeah, they genocided the people that were there first. The Hawaiians genocided the people that were there first. This is a long, never-ending story. Like, I read so many old books. I spent 3 days last week in the library here, and in fact, I was going there today and to do some things until Alex Jones called up to go on. And so, but you can see reading through these old books how many. This has just been one steady war since before we got here, since before the Spaniards got here, since before everybody got here. The Indians were killing each other like crazy, right? And so this is just humans being humans. It's always going to be. If you got something valuable, somebody's going to come in. If your women are wearing gold and silver and things like that, and they're pretty, and that group has more men than you have, they're going to come take them. They're going to take your gold and silver and your women, right? That's how this rolls.
That's called Sweden today.
Yep.
Come on in. But if anywhere you look at it, it's our people versus the second to last people to conquer it. Forgetting the third, fourth, fifth.
Exactly.
The Maoris, when Kiwis go around the world, they do that haka dance. Make the faces. The Maoris weren't native to New Zealand. They just discovered New Zealand and just exterminated all the other natives that were there. So by the time that the Brits got to New Zealand, there were Maoris who were just finishing the slaughter of the Indians that they got there just before the Brits.
The only reason these psychological operations work with people going, "Hey, we're the latest, people that are being put down by whomever," is because people put up with it and accept it and actually argue about it instead of going, "No, you actually genocided the people before you," and you know what I'm saying? It's just like, just don't even play the game. But I see this all over the place. Like right now, there's clear anthropological warfare going on here in Panama. Clear. It's clear that, anthropological warfare is a type of warfare I see all over the world. I spent a year in Nepal. I was out with the Maoists a lot. They were saying everybody needs to speak their own languages, right? Everybody has to speak their old sing your old songs and da-da-da-da-da. You go down between Indonesia and Malaysia, and it's the same thing. cultural appropriation with music. All these things that you think you see only in America, I see it in these old history books.
Sure.
I see it like, 200 years ago stuff. There's nothing new about it. They've just made it more industrial strength.
Even in Morocco, the Berbers, they created a whole new alphabet for a language that was never written.
Chuck and I were over there and we were looking at the road signs driving down the road, and I'm like, what language is that? And between Chuck and me, we've been to pretty much every country on earth, and I'm like, I've never seen that weird language, because it wasn't Arabic, it wasn't English, obviously, or French or anything like that. And so I said, you know what? I bet that's information war. So I got back to the hotel and I looked it up. Sure enough, because Berber is a class of languages. How many do they have? Like 7 languages? I can't remember. And maybe some Berber speakers on here. But it was they didn't have an alphabet or anything. So they went to this big stage of, instead of using Arabic characters, let's use a modified, or not even a modified Arabic characters, which everybody already understood. They made up a language from the bottom up. It's like, it looks like a bunch of computer Furby talk or something. Right? Mm-hmm. And so that's just part of the information war. That's all it is. And then, they're doing the same thing in Japan. They're doing everywhere, anthropological warfare. And I'm telling you, Thailand is Thailand is in great danger, because I'm watching all these different sort of weapon systems that I know quite well. Anthropological warfare, drugs, and all these different types of weapons that are brought to the battlefields. And most people don't even realize they're going on. When I never even heard of museum warfare, which is part of this information anthropological warfare. Museum warfare. It's like you going into these libraries and finding 200-year-old books that countries are sponsoring, like quote unquote Holocaust museums. The Chinese will sponsor them to demoralize or to rile up people. I mean, these are all part of information warfare, but 99% of people just walk into a museum and go, wow, I never knew that this group was so bad to that group. Who built that museum and why? I've been to many, 100 museums. I don't even know, a lot more, in dozens of countries. I go to museums all over the place. And Masako and I have been to, I don't know, maybe 50 together museums. We went to like 30 countries in the last 4 years. And in each country, we go to museums and yada, yada. So you can see, clear patterns, right? Because a museum is like a book. I mean, you can write it any way you want, and so there's archaeological warfare, which is quite interesting, and they all play together into information war, right? All these different. So when I go against people like Dope or Joe Rogan, and people are like, "Oh, you're against freedom and blah 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 blah," I'm like, no, I study war, like high level war, not go have shootouts in the jungle war, but really high level war, right? Like where it really happens, like routes. That's why the Panama Canal's out here, right? Nord Stream, right? Groningen gas field, these sorts of things. Museum information war is the highest form of warfare, right? So when I'm going after the intoxicants, you'll see in book after book after book, it's whether it's from 1648, a book I found recently down in Argentina talking about the Spaniards using intoxicants to wipe out the indigenous people in Guatemala, and just wiping them out with intoxicants, stealing all their stuff. This is a 1648 book. It was reprinted in about 1920 or so. I find it all over the place. And in fact, I found these 4 books anyway. But the bottom line is intoxicants have throughout space and time been used as weapons of mass destruction and for psychological operations, right? Because intoxicants are the grease of psychological operations. So when I see like Dope or Joe Rogan doing this, and I'm looking at this from the eyes of somebody who's written 3 books on information warfare, specifically Chinese information warfare, as it pertains to Japan. The books are only in Japanese. I've been studying this for a long time in many countries, right? So when I see that, it looks very different when the average dope smoker looks at it. I look at it for what it is. That is a weapon, and Elon Musk and Joe Rogan smoking dope together, that was an attack. That was a direct attack on the youth around the United States, around the world. That's exactly what that was. That was a weapon. That was not an accident. That was not, these guys are just so stupid, let's go to Mars together. I'm not smart enough to not smoke dope in front of millions of people, but I'll go to the Mars. Let me tell you one thing. Elon Musk, he talked about he had to get his jabs to go see his gigafactories over in Germany, right? Because he said, he's got these multi-billion-dollar facility over in Germany. So he said he had to get the jab. And then he said explicitly, the science is unequivocal, and he recommended everybody get the death jabs, right? Elon Musk specifically said, and this may be verbatim, if not, it's very close, the science is unequivocal, right, on the death jabs. That's what he's talking about. And he said he got 2, right? So he could go to Germany. Now, Masako and I went to Germany multiple times during that time period, right? Including went to BASF, and because of the Nord Stream stuff. We were in Netherlands. We were in Luxembourg. We were all over Europe. We were in, a dozen European countries probably, right? Never got the jab. But the guy that says he wants to put a brain in our head, a chip in our brain.
The Neuralink.
Yeah, the Neuralink, and can go to Mars and do the tweezer thing with the rockets and all that stuff, which is really cool and awesome. I'm totally for the space exploration, 100%. But the guy that says he's doing all this stuff is bragging practically about his ketamine issues, right? The date rape drug. He practically brags about his ketamine use, right? And so this is the guy. He is just an actor. But he said he couldn't get to his giga. Listen, let me tell you how it should have been handled. If German government said, well, you can't come to your gigafactory without getting the death jab, I'd be like, okay, today's Friday, and I will be at my factory on Monday. I'm going to land at that airport near my thing in a helicopter. And if you don't let me in, I'm going to shut the factory. That's the way it'll be. You will let me in, or I will shut the factory. It will be shut on Monday. That simple. I'm coming to my factory. That's the way you play it, right? And if they don't do it, shut the factory straight up. And then the next country will let you in, and then they'll open the factory back up, and you'll be back in your gigafactory. But he didn't do that. Why? Because he's part of the larger game. So the information war is intense. It's huge. I don't expect drug addicts to be able to actually see it because they're drug addicts. And we can get the druggies will defend their bongs, man. If you read the book Rape of the Mind by Juice Merlot, he talks about this, page after page, not just that book, so many on the use of intoxicants and this is in the Machiavellian book. I see this over and over and over from books from the 16, 17, 1800s, 1900s. And, the new dope addicts out there, they all think that they know something about dope, and it's not called dope. Cannabis isn't dope. And they're so doped out and so low IQ that they don't actually realize dope is a catch-all term for all that crap. You can find it in anyway, the bottom line is it's working. The more intoxicated they are, the more they will fight you to stay intoxicated and pretend that they are morally right and morally superior and informed and enlightened because, they see constellations and pretty pictures in their mind. There's a statue of Albert Einstein's head close to me here. It's a big head, right? And behind it, somebody has painted "I love weed," right? And the whole section of town is messed up. You know what I mean? It's ghetto, right? I mean, this is the thing. This doesn't have to be like this, but these weapons of the intoxicants are a weapon of mass destruction, and they are being unfurled across Thailand. Thailand is going to get wiped out from this, and the anthropological warfare and some other things.
And it's interesting to just study George Soros, not to make him the catch-all boogeyman, but
he is.
He's one of them. He's definitely a big player, trying to pass it to his moron son probably won't work. But he made his money, crashing national currencies, working with the State Department. Mike Benz Cyber on Twitter has done a lot of good exploratory work on this, how it's a nexus between insider knowledge from the State Department, 6 months in advance, we're going to be, kicking that, we're going to be sanctioning such and such a country and what it's going to do to their currency, that whether to go long or short on that currency because you have insider knowledge. So George Soros made his first fortunes doing that. But as soon as he created the Open Society, all drugs legal everywhere was like one of his first commandments on his tablets was legalize every drug everywhere,
Yeah.
because it just makes people open to invasion. It lowers resistance. It's like introducing an autoimmune deficiency into a
It is.
population.
But the dope heads will defend you. They'll talk about my rights and all this crap and how much, things that they see and learn from being all doped up. And that's how stupid it makes people. It dumbs them down, right? And they'll go, what about alcohol? Yeah, that too, right? Exactly.
But it's not even,
Yeah,
it's not only physical drugs and alcohol anymore. There are people totally addicted to, the high return rate, TikTok type videos.
Yeah.
Shorter and shorter attention span. You have to get the adrenaline dopamine hit faster and faster. So you can't focus on anything. You can't accomplish anything because your brain is being rewired for quicker and quicker hits. Whether it's video games, porn, TikTok videos, viral videos, that you can't actually sit down and write a book, accomplish anything, because you're just in a cycle of give me another hit, give me another hit. And now it doesn't even require a pipe because you can just sit down at a computer and get your hit. But together, it's like total poison when you put the two together.
Yeah. And the dope heads, they don't have any defense when you don't meet them halfway. It's like, I'm not going to meet you halfway. If you're going to be a dope head, I'm not taking you anywhere. I don't want to work with you. I don't want to talk with you. I don't have time for you. There's 1 million people I want to talk with, and none of them are dope heads because you're wasting my time, And it's like, and once you start shunning them like that, like they should be shunned. See, I'm not saying, people say, oh, you're saying the government should lock people up. Never said that. You won't find it. Never said it. Doesn't exist. For doing drugs. I'm saying no, shun them. Stop feeding them. Stop feeding their habit, right? Stop going, oh, you poor devil, you must have had a poor life. I had dinner the other day with somebody. All he wanted to talk about was I had to shut the dinner down. And there's one of these guys that wants to talk about his PTSD. I'm like, done. I'm done, man. I don't want to hear about the VA. I don't want to hear about PTSD. We got things to do, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like, you didn't even go to combat, you know what I mean? Because people give sympathy. You give too much sympathy, and the next thing you know, you got this feedback loop of, oh, poor me, which is part of the psychological operation, is to make people feel like a victim. To be, I've got some, please give me sympathy. I don't want your sympathy, right? And I'm not giving you sympathy, right? We need to man up and be American men and stand up for our country, which does not include, hey, I got to be nice to Joe Rogan or I can't get on a show. To hell with Joe Rogan. You know what I mean? Like, to hell with Joe Rogan, right? Stop selling out and going on to a show with a dope head. They're bringing all these major guests on there, and then he takes that traffic and gets American youth addicted with it. Think it through. This isn't big calculus. You know what I mean? You don't have to know how to do derivatives or anything, right? This is simple stuff. It's like arithmetic.
There's a couple other podcasters I could name that before they start recording, they sit around drinking, and it's like right out of Intel 101. Get the guy drinking, and he'll talk and say things he would regret saying if he was sober.
Yeah. So who are some of these guys, if you're willing to say it?
There's a former SEAL.
Who's that?
Yeah.
Who's that? I don't know who that is. You can't say it?
Well, I'm just saying that there are people that have been persona non grata out of the community because they just get on a roll talking about things that OPSEC should have said you shouldn't have talked about.
Mm-hmm. Who is
tactics and procedures that it's cool guy stuff. Look, the podcasters want to get people on to talk about cool guy tactics, my coolest missions, and it's like, hey, we're still using that, man.
Yeah.
Once you disclose that, it's burned.
Yeah.
But they'll sit around for an hour before recording drinking Jack Daniels, so that the guy will be fed. His ego will be fed like, what's the coolest thing you ever did? And it's some tactic that they're still using.
Yeah. Money, ideology, coercion, and ego, right?
Nice.
That's the big ones, right? And intoxicants are the grease of psychological operations, grease and fuel. And it has been through space and time. You should see this book I've got from 1648. It's the one that was reprinted in about 1920. I got it in Buenos Aires in an old bookstore. And it talks explicitly about how the Spaniards were using some kind of drink, it had a rotten frog in it and all these sorts of things to get the Indians drunk, and would just actually steal everything from them. So they would lure them in as they were coming through and get them start drinking. And then so that the indigenous people were actually hired by some of the other settlers to help them with, delivering crops or whatever. And then these others along the way would get them drunk and, basically buy all their crops at, 1/10 the price or whatever. There was actually one court case in this old 1648 book. Somebody lost his case because he had got the Indians drunk and bought the crops at a low price. It's just normal stuff. It's nothing new. So when you see these things, and you have to ask yourself, now for the average person who looks at somebody like Joe Rogan and they go, well, that guy's rich. He gets, X millions per year or whatever. How much he really gets, I have no idea. But actually, even if he gets, $100 million a year, which I highly doubt, but even if he did, that's nothing. That's dust compared to what's going on, right? That's dust compared to taking over the United States. That's nothing. That's accounting dust that would not be noticed, right? He's nothing. He's a fungible condom, just like all of these guys are. He's manufactured, he's got some basic skills, and then he's manufactured, right? And he's put in front of millions of young people to do what? Distract you. And of course, they're going to have a lot of good. Remember, when you're doing a poisoning, whatever you're serving the poison on is probably going to be mostly not poison. It's a big old buffet, great stuff. And then one little drop in your glass, right? And that's it. Great buffet. Had 7-course dinner. It was really wonderful, except for that one microscopic little speck.
Yeah,
right?
always. Like if you're feeding disinformation, for it to work, you have to burn some of your own people so that they'll believe you. So you have to be willing to be treacherous to some of your own allies, because nobody's going to believe a false defector if he doesn't come with some information that the enemy will say, it must be true because he burned some of his own people. So you have to put a lot of truth in with the poison for the poison to be
It'll be
swallowed.
mostly true. It'll be mostly true. It'll be mostly a great meal. It'll be mostly true. What's his name? Joe Rogan. I was on with Alex today, but Joe Rogan, when he gets all these people on, these great guests, he gets Alex on, he gets all these people on, Brett Weinstein, we took to the Darian and all these sorts of things. They get them on there because they have high quality stuff. And they're really good guests. Weinstein's quite smart. And so many others are very smart. So it's worth watching for those things. However, and then, hey, let's have some whiskey. You know what I mean? Hey, that's payload right there.
And you have to know who was setting this up. I mean, there are a couple of podcasters that, YouTube, obviously, they went from no followers to, 1 million followers in a month with no views. It's like, wait a minute, this is not organic.
Yeah.
And these people are basically information operations that suddenly go from 0 to 100 miles an hour as a podcast.
Yeah.
And they have to be entertaining, but they suddenly have this $1 million studio with no visible organic growth. They're just given it. I mean, but you could go down a long list. The whole Daily Wire crew is how did they get suddenly from, okay, you got some witty mouthpieces, but how did they suddenly come up with, $10 million studio and unlimited budget?
I've been in their studio. In Nashville, right? Because Masako was interviewing Candace Owens. And so I was there. I went as Masako's cameraman. So we were in there, and it's a very serious studio. And, and again, when I'm in there, I'm like, wow, Who is behind?
Who's backing them?
And Candace is clearly an actress, but she says the things that we would like her to hear. But she is clearly an actress, right? So I don't know. I mean, she a good guy or a bad guy?
Well, she's off their reservation now, and
She is.
pretty much.
Yeah.
But I guess the larger point is everybody has to, don't take anything at face value. Always look behind the curtain, around the curtain. Look for the wires that you're not supposed to see. Look for the connections between groups that are kind of hidden that you're not supposed to notice. Look for gears that don't appear to be connected, but they always turn the same time.
Right.
There must be a connection.
As Al Johnson says, when one hand's handing you flowers, the other hand, watch what the other hand's doing. Right. Yeah.
Well, guys, we're coming up on 2 hours.
Yeah.
Really? Seems like 10 minutes.
And that's after a similar amount of time with Alex.
I don't see any parachutes landing outside, so there you go. There's your update.
We're good for tonight.
Matt,
I don't see any smoke. I don't hear any booms. I don't see any jets flying low.
Matt, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter as Matt Bracken 48, and I've got basically a directing to my books website, but I got lots of actual paper books, and people can buy them from myself or from Amazon, and that's what I do. I'm thinking about a new book about Ireland, a little bit of future.
Oh Lord.
A little bit of Ireland in a few years, when it's a total battle zone.
I went over there and looked, man. Ireland's toast, as you know.
Ireland's in a bad way.
Conor McGregor was at the White House today. Did you see?
Yes, and that's major because the symbolism.
Who was at the White House?
Conor McGregor.
The MMA guy, Conor McGregor.
Oh, that's right. A bunch of people said that to me.
But their teapot, their prime minister, it's like in Irish, it's like Taoiseach or something. It's like long word that means prime minister
that nobody can pronounce.
They call him Teapot. Martin was there, but Martin came over as an official delegation with like minimal respect, whereas Conor McGregor was met on St. Patrick's Day at the White House, giving a press conference saying that the country's being overtaken by globalists, immigration's out of control, help Ireland. So it was huge symbolism.
The key part is to stop calling it immigration. It's not. It's invasion. It's genocide.
Yeah, it's invasion, and so the symbolism was very thick there. But but I'm thinking about going over there, and I'd like to write a novel about that if there's time. But meanwhile, Michael's down at the crossroads of the world where oceans and continents meet. Right there.
It is. This is the navel
of the world.
It is.
How much of the Western Hemisphere, at least.
How much longer?
Even without the canal, this would be vitally strategic land, right?
Yeah. Sir Francis Drake, we're talking, 400 plus years ago. They were hijacking mule trains of silver coming out of Peru. They were taking the silver across the isthmus to ship back to Spain. Imagine mule trains like a conveyor belt of silver.
Yeah.
That the British and the Spanish were fighting over before we ever heard of the word pirates. This was strategic ground since Balboa got there.
Yeah, and Balboa again. He started Santa Maria la Antigua del Darien in 1510. So that was the first Western settlement in any of the Americas except for on the
island. I know this because of you. And actually, when I drive up to Charleston, you go through Darien, Georgia, Darien. But how many Scots know that they're part of the United Kingdom because of one of these failed land schemes, the Darien Project?
Very rare, actually.
There were so many failed land projects. The French. The man that built the Suez Canal across Egypt was a national hero, came to Panama, wound up in prison because of all of these floating these bond issues to raise funds for the canal. So the national hero, Lesseps, from national hero to dying broke in prison. And so many empires come to grief over these land projects, the South Seas project, things like this.
Mars.
Yeah, Mars, Bitcoin.
Oh, Bitcoin, man. That Bitcoin is such a scam. I mean, don't get me wrong. I first got some in like 2013 and have a little bit now still, but it's clearly at some point they're going to close the off ramps and you still got your Bitcoin. You just can't do anything with it.
I tell people, print out a statement, take a picture of it so you can show people, look, I was a millionaire.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Michael, where can people find you?
Oh, Substack. My name, Michael Yon, Y-O-N. I'm on Twitter too, but I've started to kind of migrate over to Substack. And because you can put more, videos and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've got some cool, I'm going to put up a video of my helicopter. I got a helicopter the other day, and actually I'm trying to get one now because I have a feeling everything's going to be closed down on Friday, and I want to be able to get where I want to go without being stuck in traffic forever. And you need to get up and be able to see what they're doing without getting shanked down there. I went to one of the protests a few weeks ago, and I thought it was going to get violent, and then a huge rainstorm came and washed it out. But I think the one this Friday probably will get violent. I'd say 90% chance.
If only you knew somebody with a good camera.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I appreciate this as always. I'm sure it won't be that long before we talk again, and follow you both along. Continue. Thank you for your work, and continue to follow you both. And we'll see what happens on Friday.
See y'all.
Bye-bye.
Mic drop.
Bye.